Thanks for coming along to this panel session. My name is Jessica Twentyman. I'm a business and technology journalist. I write for the FT, for the Economist Intelligence Unit, for Diginomica, Computer Weekly, and a lot of my work does focus on big data. Today, at this panel session, we're going to be looking at how the responsibility for big data is divided up between different skilled personnel on the IT team, and in particular the emergence of a new C-level position, the Chief Data Officer, and we're very pleased to have a Chief Data Officer with us as part of this debate. I'm going to let each of our panelists introduce themselves. So guys, if you could give your name and your job title and just tell us a little bit about where you work and how long you've been there.
Hi, my name is Barry Green, Chief Data Officer, Bank of Ireland. I've been in financial services for 28 years. I was previously at HSBC as a CDO, and I've only been at Bank of Ireland like 50 days.
Hey, I'm Jason Foster. I'm CEO of a consultancy business called Cynozure. Prior to that, I was head of big data and analytics solutions for Marks & Spencer's, and I've been in the data analytics space for 15 odd years.
Thanks. Good morning. My name's Omid. I'm the interim CIO at the London Borough of Camden. I was previously CIO in the private sector for a few years for an organisation called Working Links, and before that in education. I've been at Camden for 9 months now. I'm going to keep this, am I?
I'm actually asking Barry the first question, so you need
that's
to get
really
it back
useful.
down.
Thank you.
Brilliant. So I am going to start with Barry, as I say. I'm interested to know, Barry, a little bit about the role of Chief Data Officer and what roles and responsibilities you feel that maybe a Chief Information Officer or other member of staff wouldn't. What do you bring to the role that other people can't?
Okay, firstly, I think a CDO is a business role, not a technology role. I also think that the CDO is a conduit for change. And if you think about data, it's kind of across the organisation. And so the CDO is there to kind of collaborate with the CIO, the COO, the CFO, all those guys. If you think about the way our business models have worked, it's around keeping everything tight and controlled, and people talk about people, process and systems. I think you need to add data to that now just because it's becoming so important, and that's why I think the CDO is important. So it's more strategic, it's a collaborative role, and if you think about business models, they're changing to be more collaborative, and that's why I think it's important.
Does it depend on the kind of business? Is there a certain kind of business that requires this Chief Data Officer role more than others, in your opinion?
I think it just depends on the business and what the business does, and I mean, everyone's got data in their business. So it just depends on how important they believe data is strategically to their business.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Other panelists, I'd kind of like to ask you, Jason, just in your experience, I know you've been a consultant, you've also worked at Marks & Spencer's. How do you think the strategic importance of data has changed? And in your opinion, does that call for someone to be in charge of it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, 10 years ago, I suppose, the conversation was convincing organisations and talking to organisations about what data's about, how it can add value. I think these days, people just know that data is important. They might not know what to do, they might not know how to do it, but with businesses, like Ubers and Facebooks and Airbnbs that are essentially data-driven organisations and grown out of what the data can provide, it's an imperative, and organisations know it's an imperative. So I think it's become more strategic just through organic change within the market and the disruption that some of these newer organisations have created. So some sort of established businesses are looking at ways to go, hang on a minute, we're sitting on a particularly large corporate, are saying, hang on, we're sitting on a bunch of data here, surely there's some value in it, even if I don't know what that value is yet. And startups, but I talked to a whole bunch of startups, and they're going, right, we need to start with data and then grow our business model and business proposition around it.
Fantastic, that's great. And I'd like to ask Omid as well. I mean, does the London Borough of Camden have a Chief Data Officer, or is that a role that you perform or someone else?
Can I answer some of Barry's question as well in this, if that's
Please
all right?
do.
So I've got a slightly challenging view to Barry's, I think. My perspective is actually the CIO role isn't a technology role. I think that's part of the problem. People see it as a technology role, and people in my kind of position act like technologists rather than as part of the organisation itself, and there's that separation. So my personal perspective is, I mean, the I stands for information, right, which is the exploitation of data to deliver some kind of value. So people like me in my type of role have got to be evangelizing and explaining to the organisation about how using its data could significantly deliver better outcomes or help the organisation transform in the way that it probably doesn't know how to. So I probably have a differing view around the role of the Chief Data Officer. I agree, I think it is quite a collaborative role, and my personal view on this is that if you treat data like money, you do need a steward at the C level to kind of own that, but it is everybody's responsibility, isn't it? It's the same proposition there. So in terms of what's happening at Camden, actually the chief exec, and what's interesting in a local authority is that you've kind of got this political dynamic where elected officials have an influence around the policy and delivery of a council. And so for us, actually the elected official and the chief exec act as the catalysts around the use of data. So it's not just me, it is actually coming right from the very top of the organisation.
Fantastic, that's great. I kind of want to take that a bit further because, you've all commented on the strategic value of data. It does strike me, though, that there's many, many organisations that aren't even starting to extract a minuscule amount of the potential value there. There's value there, but it's all potential and very little of it is realised. Now, this morning's opening keynote was on establishing a data culture. And it strikes me that, I think Omid kind of made this point, that someone has to be that champion, that evangelist for a data culture. I'm curious to know kind of what measures the three of you have seen in organisations you've worked for or with that have been successful in helping companies even start to think about the questions that they would want answered if only they could think of the questions.
I've got the mic, so shall I
go? Please go for it.
So knowing where to start and what to do, and there's so much data, there's so much opportunity, and people know it, but knowing where to start is the biggest challenge that I see, and that's partly why I set up Cynozure, was to help companies do that. But you've got to start somewhere, and you've got to start with something that drives business growth, that drives business value incrementally. So there is forecasts that drive growth in revenue and EBIT figures or whatever, but actually this has got to be incremental value. And if you can find a way of communicating to the organisation that some benefit has been gained by extracting, using, presenting, analysing, getting insight from an area, and driven some sort of change, whether that's improvement to products or local services or mortgage products for a financial institution, through the use of data and the insight that you've got about understanding customers and how they behave, then you sort of plant the seed, and it's the seed that needs to be planted so that you can use that as a sort of a catalyst for the change.
Fantastic, that's great. Barry?
Yeah, I'd agree with everything you just said. I find data quality is a real big driver, because once you can demonstrate to people that they've been making bad decisions based on data, and data quality is probably one of the easiest things to start, I think. And then the other thing is creating some data structures which allow you to report better than you could before. But what I've seen happen is, and data becomes very sexy for a very short period of time. And so you do an MI project, and then everyone thinks that the next week you'll have a big data lake and you'll be doing predictive analytics. So it's a really, really hard balance between actually doing something that adds value and then the expectation that gets created. So I think making that change culture is around setting the expectations clearly so that it doesn't matter what you do, so that people understand that this is hard work and it's always going to be hard work, but it involves everyone across the organisation.
Could I challenge your view on data quality being easy? I think data quality, master data, sorting out your data basically is actually really tough, and it's one of those sort of back-end, quite dull things you've got to sort, but the value that you can get by getting it right is massive. So some of the challenges, A, getting it right, and B, convincing people it's like exciting to do because of the outcome you can get to.
Can I just respond quickly? When I talk about data quality, I'm not talking about a full-blown WYSI data quality. Everyone's got, there's stewards everywhere, and your data's great. I'm talking about starting it so that people start to understand how bad their data is, and then getting the impetus to actually do something about it. Yeah.
From Camden's point of view, there's a couple of practical things that I've seen that Camden has done that has been very valuable. So the first, I spoke about the sponsorship. So Camden set up and have embedded an open data charter throughout the organisation. So that's come from kind of political leadership, but actually that's a mandate that everybody in the organisation can point to and say, look, we know it's valuable. We have a particular approach to opening our data, being a local authority. But I found that as a great reference point to if I'm getting challenged on people using their data for the benefit of the organisation, or more likely they tend to want to keep it to themselves and not use it. The other instrument that I thought has been very, very good for Camden has been actually our financial approach to budgeting is different. So what Camden did was take an outcomes-based approach to budgeting, which focused on kind of key social outcomes and political outcomes that the local authority wanted to achieve. And so we built budgets and programs of change with data and evidence at the heart of that, right from the kind of strategic planning process. So actually, those two practical things, I think, have been very valuable in helping measure, I think was your question, some of the benefits of our approach to data.
Fantastic. That kind of puts me in mind, I can't remember exactly the phrase, but there's this idea that without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And I'm curious to know, just from the perspective of your experience, when we're looking at those kind of other C-level executives, we're looking at those boardroom conversations, executive committee conversations, to what extent do you think kind of data holds the key to maybe resolving kind of dispute or conflict in the boardroom that gets so many companies into sort of states of stagnation and unable to move forward on strategy?
Thanks, man. So I think the biggest problem in the boardrooms is that because we haven't got standards for our data, we don't have consistency that we can measure against, they each come with their own number. And so it's all about, so one of the key things I'm looking to do is put in place standard hierarchies, one cost hierarchy that everyone has to use so that we can reconcile things to, so that you don't have someone coming with one number that's 10 and another number that's 5, and both numbers are quite valid, but they've been pulled together differently, and everyone's talking about them different, like they're the same. So I think the biggest issue is that the board, everyone's talking about different numbers, knowing in their heads what they mean, but it's not clear to anyone else. And so that's what I see as a key, one of the key things I'm looking to do.
I think so. For sort of management information, metrics, scorecards, that sort of thing, totally critical. One version, it's been used for ages, but one version of the truth. Revenues, revenue, margins, margin, all the rest of it. From a board level conversation, from a big data perspective, I think actually this conversation sort of a step beyond that, which is around how do you decide what things to do as a business, and how do you decide what opportunities do you go after, how do you decide which products to release, and that needs to be a data-driven conversation. So it's not about what's the coolest new part of an app to roll out. It's based on consumer feedback and data that we know about customers to decide what's the new bit of the app that you release. It's not about which is the most exciting sort of financial investment product to create. It's about what do we know from the data that we've got. So I think it's much more strategic. So you've got to solve both those things, which is tough, but you've got to solve both of those things, and that's what I think drives a really good data-driven conversation at board level.
Fantastic. Omid, do you have anything to add to that?
Again, probably something a little bit practical. So I think one of the challenges that we've talked about is culture change at a senior level. And one of the ways you can overcome that is if a particular chief officer around the board has got incredibly accurate data in order to make the point that they want to make or get the investment they want to make or help refute another point around the board. And what that does, I've seen, is it kind of catalyses the other board members to want to get close to how that person has got the data. And all of a sudden, you're kind of building a bit of a positive momentum around the use of data at board level. So actually, you can use it as a tool. I've seen it used as a tool to make sure data gets on the agenda at board.
Fantastic. Actually, if we could keep the microphone with Omid, because my next question kind of focuses on the technology aspect of this. Clearly, we've talked a lot about the strategic value of data and the kind of the data culture and the importance of all that. But at the heart of all this, there's a big technology challenge for any organisation. And, you know, our list of sponsors of this event, you know, goes to show that there are a lot of companies out there that can help, but you are going to need a lot of processing power, you're going to need a lot of storage, and on top of that, you're going to need databases, and you're going to need analytic tools. There's a lot of stuff going on here. So I'm just interested in hearing from all three of you how you handle the increased technological challenge that all this brings with it.
Okay, so I'll answer that question in a couple of dimensions, I think. So the first is if you've got some kind of data strategy or you've got programs of change that are built around data, our approach has been to kind of start small. So not massive investments in kind of enormous, well, actually I say that now, we have made big investments in platforms, but to get some of the kind of outcomes and examples shown to the organisation, we started small. There are some key building blocks that you just have to have. I think Camden, again, is in a really good position here. So we've got a master data management tool that's kind of 3 years in. So it's joining up 16 or 17 different council systems to provide golden record. And we can leverage that in some of the other business processes that we do. We've made good investments in those building blocks around BI platforms and our open data platform as well. So from a kind of an application point of view, you need to kind of buy the right kind of tool. From an infrastructure point of view, we are at a place at the moment where we're on that cloud migration journey. We've tended to host everything ourselves, but actually my personal view on that is that we are better off investing our money in higher value activities rather than for us hosting the kind of the data and managing all the systems. So we do have quite a lot of on-prem stuff, but we are moving that into cloud service as well. And I think that gives you the elasticity and scalability that you need, you know, if you fast forward 3, 4, 5 years, and how you are able to handle the volume of data that you'll end up exploiting.
Fantastic. And I guess, you know, same question there to you, Jason. How are you kind of advising your clients on where they need to make investment and where they don't, for example, or where they can find a cloud solution? How do you help them with that?
I think I always answer a what tech do we need question with what problem are you trying to solve? So, and with a business lens on it. So yes, you can go and buy any of the great technologies that are exhibiting. They all have a slightly different flavor of what they can do and what they bring. So the only way you can work out which one you need is to know what business opportunity you're going after, business problem you're trying to solve, and what you're trying to fix. So if the challenge is in customer retention, then you need to focus on something that helps you deliver on customer retention, clearly. If the challenge is regulatory and a compliance thing, then you probably need to focus on something that helps you solve whatever the specifics of gathering that data is and putting it in one place. So I always think about technology challenges in terms of what business problem do we need to solve.
But presumably you do want to invest in a way that will scale out to tackle other challenges, if that makes sense. You can't do it piecemeal every time, I guess.
For sure, which is I think where this conversation comes back to the CDO-CIO conversation and collaboration, because all of that needs to be baked into a sort of a longer term strategy about the direction of travel. I think the point about where the decision on investment, though, comes down to which problem do you want to solve, both with the lens on that solution and that problem, but also with a lens in terms of longevity. And the decision about point solution versus a sort of an enterprise solution that can deliver anything then just comes down to tactic and strategy for the sort of the IT organisation.
Fantastic. And Barry, maybe I could turn to you and just ask kind of for some insight on how, as a Chief Data Officer, you're working with technologists to make sure that they're delivering what you need to perform the analyses you want to perform.
Okay. So I've done something a little bit different. So what I've seen in the past is CDOs come in and they create big competing organisations. So they hire business data architects and they hire all these different people that actually naturally sit somewhere else in the organisation. So what I've done is, and I'm way behind the master data management piece, is I've got my policy in place, and I'm basically kind of putting a RACI in place that says the strategic architecture and innovation team, you own data modelling and architecture, and I need to be involved, and we need to agree and sign off on it to create some standards. Because what I'm seeing is we've got massive investment. We're re-platforming the banking platform. We've got 14 big programs, and everyone's running off developing solutions for customer and just about all of them. And so it's about me working with the strategic architecture team, coming up with some standards and then driving those standards across the organisation and making sure that people understand that if you don't do things in this way, you're going to create multiple versions and we're going to have to fix it. And then that's going to cost more money. So I'm just in the process of trying to work out how we monetize that. So I can go back and say, this is what you're doing. Understand you've got a delivery timeline, but let's minimise the rework because this is what it will cost you.
Fantastic, that's great. I'm conscious of the time. I have a kind of final question for the panellists, and then I do want to give the audience an opportunity to ask any questions they may have. So, but my final question focuses on kind of the art of the possible. What are the big questions that you would like to be helping your company or your clients or your borough answer that will require new approaches and skills so that they can answer questions that perhaps it's difficult to find answers for today? So what are those big questions?
For me, it's about understanding how we make all the regulations that are hitting financial services into a win-win. So if you look about open source banking, it's about how do we make that an advantage for us so that we can deliver something to the customer faster. So the customer walks in and says, I want a mortgage. And you go, it's already been approved, Barry, and by the way, I've got 5 houses around, where in the areas you like, and all that's because we've kind of brought everything together, we've collaborated with our other vendors, and we've done things in a smart way that delivers the benefit for our customer, and then they want to come back.
I'll focus on retail from my M&S days for this one. And the big thing there is all about understanding sort of consumer behaviour in a very multi-channel sort of environment. And by multi-channel, I mean sort of online stores, mobile, sort of desktop shopping and that sort of thing. So it's understanding consumer behaviour in order to push that understanding into the marketing effort, into the supply chain effort in terms of getting the right product in the right stores at the right time and those sorts of things. So I think any consumer-facing business, it's about getting a handle on who are your customers, what are they doing, and how do I interact with them in a way that drives some sort of loyalty.
Thanks. I think from a local authority point of view, if you think about what the big challenges are, they are in helping people in really complex social situations with very complex needs, and also making sure that your borough or your town or your city runs well, so the bins are collected, you're able to handle, the parks are clean, all that kind of stuff. So I'll answer this question with a bit of an anecdote, if that's okay. So we did something really interesting at Camden where we mapped a journey of actually it's a pretty heartbreaking story, really. It's a lady who was in a domestic violent relationship. She had 2 children, and we mapped her journey with the council over the course of 10 years. And how that mapping ended up was she'd gone through multiple kind of drug and mental health issues. She'd ended up with 3 partners with 5 children. And we showed all of the touch points, and this was a kind of manual mapping, with the council, with different parts of the council, and with other agencies. And what you can see is kind of a pattern that says, you know, we've done a lot of reactive and responsive care this end, and actually, if we had, you know, seen a trigger earlier, we could have intervened earlier in a different way. So part of our approach there is, and that narrative I use to say this is how data could be really different. Just one point on that: we in the council in that mapping replaced a door a number of times in her property, and we saw that as a repair. But actually, that's a great indicator for domestic violence. And if we were joining those things up, that's where data can really do some incredible things. So that's where we see the art of the possible.
Right, great example. Fantastic. I am going to turn it over to you, audience. Does anyone in the audience have questions for any of our panelists? There's a gentleman up here. One of our mics will be reaching you shortly. If you could just maybe give your name and where you're from, and
I'll just shout. Okay. It's a question that perhaps affects all of you in different ways, but to what extent does compliance and legal interpretation of regulations that you have to conform to affect your ability to have forward-thinking and proactive use of data within your organisation? And how do you resolve the conflicts that arise?
I'll answer first, shall I? So it's interesting from a local authority point of view. There's a whole bunch of kind of information governance statute and freedom of information, data protection issues that surround how we use data. Part of my challenge actually is trying to move the organisation from a risk-averse culture to kind of a risk appetite that allows us to exploit the data. And the way that we've done that, and it's a long journey, is to kind of pick pockets of people who actually get what they could do with the data, and then challenge kind of perception, because actually most of the problem is perception. If you start kind of scratching under the surface of your legal people or your information governance people who say, don't do that, and you say, well, why? Show me, where's, you know, actually show me the law. When you get to that level, you suddenly start kind of peeling away some of the perception challenges. So start small, challenge, and show value quickly, and that's what we've started to do. And it gets a little bit more complicated when you're working with other agencies as well, like the police and the fire service. So what we've tried to do is just find like-minded people and try to collaborate in kind of small ways, and we found that to be quite useful.
I'll give a short bit on this one. I think there's 2 things. One is that a lot of the compliance and regulation, particularly in financial services, is about auditability and access and being able to show you've got this sort of stuff. So I see that as an opportunity to create. You have to do that stuff, so it's the opportunity to create the lake or the data platform that you actually really want to do all the value-adding stuff. So there's sort of that side, rather than seeing it as a drain, although it does drain money and resource, it's an opportunity also to do some of the master data things that you need to do. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
So I agree with everything these guys have said. I just say that what you need to be aware of is that there's competing legislation all over the place. So to Amit's point, you need to understand why GDPR. You don't have to go letter of the law, because there's lots of other legislation that's competing. So you need to understand your data. You need to understand who's using it. That's kind of critical, and then you can do whatever you like after that. you basically then got to make a policy decision around how you're going to, how you're going to use that data, why you're using it, and even in GDPR, if you're using it for a justified reason that the customer's consented to, you can do what you like. Well, it's, within the bounds of what we've agreed.
Within reason.
Yeah.
We've got about 1 minute. Does anyone, lady here?
Hi. My question is, in the side of sharing data and go for Omid, I've seen. So in this world where we are moving to cloud-based platforms, and we're moving to an opportunity to share data, I think this is kind of very breaking horizon for, especially for governments and agencies that usually have been very working in silos and within departments, and every department has their own folders and their own files. So they bring the opportunity to share data, bring it together. And the case you were explaining about this lady with this tracking issue, well, it was based on your Camden Borough, but what happened if this woman has been moving around? It's so important, vital, this information come together. How would you see that this is something that's happening now?
Just to clarify, so is your question the role of the cloud basically in the integration of data that might previously have sat in silos or may come from different silos? Is that what you're asking?
My question is about, is this new paradigm about cloud system bringing some opportunity to share data? Is something that is happening in the organization right now?
Okay, so from a local authority point of view, if you look, I can speak on behalf of London actually, because Camden being a London borough, one of 33, our population is about 250,000. So we've got a lot of data on 250,000 people. London has, 7-8 million people, and that is a really different data set. And our challenge, and we're actually working with the GLA, Greater London Authority, the Mayor's Office, and other boroughs to say, how can we share data across London to help tackle some of these challenges that I've described and that you've mentioned. So actually, we're not focusing on the technology. Cloud is completely irrelevant to the conversation for us. It's about how do we get, some of the restrictions that are in place, perception or reality, how do we get rid of those? And how can we come together across common outcomes we want to achieve, and what data do we need in order to enable that?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop it there because I'm told we're not only completely out of time, we've gone over slightly and it's lunchtime. So thanks very much. And if you could just show your appreciation for the panellists.